So today we are going to continue talking a little bit more about trauma. So we're going to focus our time on what we call vicarious trauma, which is also sometimes referred to as secondary trauma. This is what happens to us when we are in a caregiving position, right? So you're all going to be helping people who maybe are traumatized or in the process of needing some really immediate assistance. And when we offer that kind of help over and over and over again, we kind of run into this, this kind of reaction around getting a little bit traumatized ourselves. And then we each have our own trauma in our background. So that kind of combines with it and sort of can be a really, really difficult experience. But there are ways to actually hold that stress and manage it. And so we're going to be talking about what it is, how it shows up, and then what do you do about it, right? But before we do that, we're actually going to be talking about psychological first aid, exactly like how you offer immediate assistance to someone, let's say, who's in an accident, right? Like you've just witnessed an accident. You're going to do some things like CPR. You're going to do some immediate things to like take care of them. When we have an emotionally really hard thing happen, even if it's not traumatic, it's so helpful when we have a lot of people in our society, community, neighborhood, trained in what we call psychological first aid. So you can immediately help the person, right? Let's say you're just waiting in a bus stop somewhere and the person next to you has something really hard going on, or you see that they're really upset. You can do something, right? Like you don't have to be a therapist in the moment, but you can actually help that person get through that, whatever big feeling they're having in the moment or whatever bad thing has happened to them. So we're going to be talking about that first before we talk about vicarious trauma. But before we do anything at all, I thought we would have a bigger group, but even in the group we have here, I want us to take about 5 to 6 minutes. And I want you to think about something you did for yourself that helped you relax recently. And how did that make you feel? So take a minute to think about this. I'll share an example from last week. I was having a very, very, very hectic week. And on Wednesday afternoon, for whatever lucky reason, I had 3 things get canceled in the afternoon. And so it was like one in the afternoon. So I was like ready for a long day and these 3 things got canceled. I decided to take a nap, which I never do. Like I don't get to take a nap in the afternoon. I never I love it. On the weekends, I might take a nap, but it's not a thing I've done in a long time. And I gave into it. I took a nap for 2 hours, felt very relaxed. But when I got up, I was feeling so guilty about taking the nap because I was like, well, I could have done X, Y, and Z. This was my time to like maybe catch up on the following week. But instead, I chose to take a nap. And all the relaxation I felt just turned into guilt. And then I had to tell myself that it's sort of silly to think like that, right? I'm working hard. I actually cannot go on and on, like, act as if I'm running on a full tank when I'm super stressed. I'm snapping at every person in my family. Nobody wants to be near me. I have to do something to like calm down, get my center back. And if taking a nap is the way to do it, it's the way to do it. There's no shame in it or guilt in it, but it took me a while to like get there. So I'm just sharing that as an example. I would love to hear if anyone has taken some step in this direction, like to help yourself relax, and how did that make you feel? So you can just go in any order. I can also take this down. Let's do that. Go ahead, Aparna.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought this up this time because last week, it was a very hectic week for me as well. So I got up early in the morning by 5 o'clock on last Saturday. I told my kids, they're just 4-year-old and 3-year-old. I told them, do you want to go to the beach? I woke everyone up. I went early in the morning, saw a sunrise, and I felt I should do this every week. So the kids get to walk on the sand and they tend to play. That also helps them, no? Right now, they'll have to walk, jump, ride, and things like that. So it actually made me feel good. So I wanted to do this every Saturday, but I don't know if they will wake up by 5 o'clock every day, but it is really, really, really good.
Also, there's something so special about taking time for yourself and breaking the routine, right? Like it's a new way to start the day, and there's something very energizing about that. Thank you for sharing that. It's such a beautiful example.
This is the first time I've done that actually. I just got up early, so I thought let me try this, and fortunately everyone woke up too.
Anyone else want to share?
Right. So I'll go next. Can I?
Of course you can. Yes.
Okay. So on Thursday, I was doing a lot of things. Work was at its peak. I snapped so much because I was going solo with both kids. My daughter told me that you are grumpy because this happened according to what you planned, and all my schedule was haywire. And then I put Harshita, my little 3-year-old, for a nap, and I was so tempted to sleep with her. But I didn't because I knew I'll get up feeling very guilty because I had so much in my hands. But then after I came and I sat down in my workspace, I just out of nowhere, I decided I can't take this anymore. And I actually sat and listened to one of my favorite songs. It's a 3.5 minute song. It's from Evanescence. I love the haunting music that it has. And I just put it on Spotify. I shut my eyes and I was just putting and it really rejuvenated me. I felt very good. And I didn't feel guilty about not taking that nap. But now when I'm hearing Mahima's story, I'm now thinking maybe I should have taken that nap as well. But because the whole weekend was tricky, it was very hectic for me. I wasn't available even the team for calls and all that. But anyway, long story short, I think this weekend is going to be much better.
That's great, Smita. I wish I had listened to music. It would have reduced my guilt.
Something about, I don't know why we have that. It must be an explanation. But when I nap, I always wake up feeling guilty.
Well, I can tell you where it comes from. For me, it's entirely from my family, right? Like there's a way that taking a nap in the middle of the day is considered lazy. Like why do you need a nap? There's a laziness associated with it, right? So when you grow up like that, even sleeping past a certain time in the morning, like there's something about that
yes,
it still is I mean, today nobody cares. I don't care about it. I will sleep in if I have to, but I can't. That's a whole other issue, right? Like for those
the body
of us who
clock
are
gets so tuned
moms,
to it, right?
Yeah, like you don't sleep. And so I think you have to fight all those old tapes that are in our mind.
Absolutely.
It's not just that. I think we're also living in a world where productivity is somehow like super valued, right? Like every waking hour, you have to be productive, you have to be working hard, it's entirely a capitalist agenda. And we've all fallen in line with that. Anyone else want to share? Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, Smita.
And I said so much for being productive. I mean, it's a. Where did I read this? I'm not quite sure. But yeah, anybody else? Very quickly, can we have some people? Maria, Sri. I think Sri's.
Do you want to go?
Yeah, you can carry on.
Okay. So same, like for the past few weeks were very hectic and I had lots of things to be done. I wanted to read lots of things. No, I've started my own private practicing. I just wanted to read more on that. But on the weekend, I had time. Luckily, my daughter went to bed early, so I had lots of time in my hand. And I just so badly wanted to watch Netflix. And I haven't watched Netflix for a very long time. It's like say like a month or so. Like I mean, it's a very long time. I don't remember the exact time. But I was so badly wanted to watch. At the same time, I was feeling so guilty. No, you have so much of things piled up on your list. You haven't done anything. It's still there. And if you're going to spend it, I know you'll go for the whole night. Mommy. Yes. Okay. So then at a point, okay, fine. This is weekend. The time is for me. Let me go ahead. Let me go ahead with it. So I kind of watched Netflix, and I'm happy. I was not feeling very guilty. So that was the main. Yes, that was me.
Great example. Thank you for sharing, Maria.
Thank you.
Amuda, Janet, Josephine, Steffi.
Hi, Muda.
Sometimes we get to have that nap to be more productive as well. So,
Exactly.
Hi. Actually, I would like to relax myself only when I go out. But my little one is not happy sending me out. But I found some times to go out and get relaxed.
Yeah. By yourself, you mean, without the family or just by yourself?
No, even my husband is coming also, no problem.
It's relaxing.
I want to just go out.
Yeah, that's good.
Actually, going out with friends, I'll be happy with my parents and my husband is a bit sensitive. He don't talk much, so even if he is coming out, no issue. He will be sitting here like a doll. The problem is, actually, I would like to ask one more thing. When I go out, my little daughter is not that much happy. Even though I try to convince herself that I am going out, she said okay, but if the time frame is delayed, then she is getting tensed.
How old is she?
She is 11 years old. And I already told you she is a myelomeniingocele patient. Upper limbs are good, lower limbs we are giving that.
So her separation anxiety probably is very high, right?
She is telling that I am facing more defeats. The way she told us, I am always facing the defeats. So I told no, let it be the stepping stones. Like that, I am convincing her, but still she is.
But it's, what you're speaking to is such a good example, right, of how important it is to actually take care of ourselves in order for you to be able to take care of her, right? We all do this. There's some like that when you think about flying, they always say, if you have to put your oxygen mask on, you wear yours first before you help the person next to you. It reminds you of that, right? If you don't actually take care of yourself and find a way to
take care of her,
you're not going to be like, you can't do that, you can't sustain it, right? So and the more you do it, the more used to it she'll get also. Even though it's hard, I think you have to go and come back a few times for her to believe that it's going to be okay. All right. Do we have... Sorry, what did you say, Maria?
I just said, Janet, did you want to go next?
Janet and Steffi, do you want to go?
Steffi is actually not feeling well.
Oh, okay.
That's why her camera and mic was off.
I see. Okay, well, why don't we continue, since we've lost some time to let's move on. If Janet or Steffi want to add something, they can always use the chat. All right, let me pull up my slides again. There we go. So very quickly, I'm going to walk us through just some of the basics we already learned, right? When I first came in, I talked a lot about like, what is trauma? What are the types of trauma? What are the symptoms of trauma? Just very quickly going to run through that again, just as a refresher, and then we'll start talking about psychological first aid. So if you remember, what is trauma? It is actually one event. It could be a series of events that's experienced by anyone that's physically or emotionally harmful, sometimes even life-threatening, and it can have some lasting emotional effects on us. So the effects of a trauma kind of are a lifetime or a really long time. The experience is traumatic when it exceeds the capacity we have to actually cope with it. So we each have some coping resources, right? We get through a difficult day, but when it's traumatic, it's really a shock on the system. So it's not like you have a lot of resources that you can use to get over it. And then if you remember, we talked about the types of trauma, right? So acute trauma is a one-time event. So I gave you an example last time of maybe getting in a car and getting into a car accident. That's a one-time trauma. That's an acute trauma. When we talk about chronic trauma, these are like repeated over a long period of time. So domestic violence is an example of a chronic trauma. Poverty is an example of chronic trauma. And then there are some specialized types of trauma like caste or identity-based trauma. So this is a trauma that's experienced by a whole group of people across generations when people feel discriminated against, right? Religion is also in this category. You see like religious-based discrimination. That's a trauma for folks. And then historical and intergenerational trauma. So experiencing COVID together is a good example of this. Whole community, countries, nations continents are impacted, right? The war in Ukraine, that's an example of a historical or intergenerational trauma because many generations are impacted at the same time, and they're going to feel the effects of it for a very, very long time. And then one thing to remember in trauma, whenever we talk about trauma, our body is actually keeping the score. So it holds all of those experiences in how much we feel is all stored in the body. And so we experience the effects of the trauma in both our mind and in our body. So what are some symptoms that we see right after an event occurs? So these are the, when you're in your helping position, you're going to see women who have recently had something traumatic happen, maybe. And when you're dealing with someone like that, you're going to notice that they have a lot of shock. They can't believe what happened. They don't have the words to actually explain to you what happened. That's all shock. Numbness, which is not feeling much. You feel like disconnected from your mind and your body. Disorientation, not able to give you details of what happened or seem confused, right? Like, I don't even know. I wasn't present when it happened because it was too much for me. So then if I have to repeat to you what happened, I don't have the memory for it. So difficulty focusing. You see a lot of people with trauma will jump from one topic to another. It won't be in the same order that something happened. So they may tell you something that happened to them when they were 7 years old, and then they may tell you something that happened to them when they're 17 years old, and then bounce back, right? This is an expression of trauma because it's unbearable even to recall and tell you the story. So they're jumping kind of all over the place, and then you have to kind of help them put it together. And then lastly, dissociation, which is, I think last time I gave an example of like maybe going for a run or a walk, and you don't even realize how far you've gone. Or when you're driving, you have that experience of like, if I asked you, how did you get from point A to point B? You may not be able to tell me, like how many traffic lights were there? What colors did you see, right? Like it's just not in your awareness, but we're just getting through the motions of the day without feeling. So that's dissociation. And then we talked a little bit about how trauma shows up for individuals, right? So the symptoms are sleep disturbances, irritability, a lot of changes in the mood and emotion, high levels of anxiety, trouble staying in the present. Your mind is wandering. Maybe Smita or Maria are talking to me for 20 minutes, and suddenly I realize I haven't actually heard or listened to anything that they've said, really. But I'm here and present and I'm nodding, right? Hypervigilance, which is the tendency to be suspicious a lot or to look at everyone in our life as someone who's potentially going to be harmful to us, right? So, and then your guard is always up. And then a lot of body symptoms. Trauma is often expressed as pain, back pain, neck pain, headaches, frequent headaches, all it's symptoms of possibly trauma. And then at the group level, usually it triggers previous traumas. And then members of a group may have trouble understanding what is their own feeling and what they're feeling on behalf of the group. And then lastly, it kind of changes the values of a group. One example of this recently is, actually, it's not so recent, but I think a lot about the tsunamis, right? Like, so Sri Lanka was impacted a lot. So was India. I mean, our coast was impacted, right? The southern coast of India. For a very long time, people in those communities, in those coastal communities, had a very, very hard time living there, right? Because children were having nightmares. Parents were worried that they could not actually protect their children. And communities of fisher villages were actually feeling all of these symptoms at the same time. That would be an example of some of the symptoms of group level trauma. And you don't know if it's your own. Are you feeling it on behalf of somebody else? Maybe your neighbor or your relative or. All right. So any questions on any of this? This is all sounding familiar? You remembered all of it from the last time? Okay.
Yes.
Good. So now let's talk about psychological first aid. So the best way to think about psychological first aid is it is the help that we provide one another immediately after a disaster or a crisis has happened. And when I say crisis or disaster, we're not talking just about big scale events, right? Like a war or like terrorism, or those are all great examples. But I'm also actually talking about everyday things that happen in our life. And you happen to be the person there next to somebody else, and you have an opportunity to help them. So those are also considered crises and disasters. So psychological first aid, it's an evidence-based approach. And what I mean by evidence-based is that it's scientifically shown over and over again that these steps, when you take them to help someone who's had a crisis, have proved to be really, really helpful. So it's not just somebody's feeling that this is actually a good thing. It's actually proven in science that these steps really help individuals when they're in a crisis situation. And it's a method that we use to help children, adolescents, teenagers, right? Adults and families in an immediate aftermath of a disaster or a crisis situation. So let's say you're in the maternity ward and someone you've been helping is about to go into labor, right? They could be experiencing that as a crisis. Right? You know that maybe they're going to be okay, they're in a hospital, but for them, it feels like a crisis. So what you're going to do immediately to help them is what we call psychological first aid. Anything that you do to like calm them down, help them realize that they're in safe hands, not over-promising, right? Making sure that they understand. You remember last time we talked about in trauma, choice is very important. When you're in a crisis, you're not going to keep that in mind. So you become kind of their spokesperson to help them. And psychological first aid is actually designed to reduce any initial distress caused by traumatic events and to foster short and long-term adaptive functioning and coping. So imagine if you see somebody who got hurt, right? And they're bleeding. What is the first thing you're going to do? Anyone, just unmute and tell me. you're walking on the road, somebody just fell in front of you and they're bleeding. What would you do?
Use some water to stop bleeding. Do something to
Stop the blood.
Exactly, right?
And
So
if someone
Yeah.
else is also with us, we can ask them to call ambulance to take them to the
Correct.
nearest hospital.
Exactly. So you're going to do what you can right away, which is like stop the bleeding. You may have a sweater, you may have a scarf, whatever, and you're going to tie, like help them stabilize. You're also going to mobilize people around you, right? Because you can't be doing everything in the moment. You can't be holding this person's arm and be the one calling. Maybe you have to, but you're going to mobilize the people around you. All of those actions are what we call psychological first aid because it's in response to the distress that's immediate. Yes, Samuda, go ahead.
Ma'am, this is not psychological first aid, right, ma'am? This is physically he is wounded, and we are giving first aid to them. Psychological first aid means when they are emotionally depressed, frustrated. That is the first aid we have to give for psychological, right? Am I correct or
you are absolutely correct, and that was the link that I'm going to make next, which is this person who's just gotten hurt, right? What is their state of mind in general? Like, how are they feeling in the moment? We've all had something like this happen. How are they likely to be feeling?
Nothing should happen to me. I have to take care of
Exactly.
my family. My family depends on me. Like that only we will think, right? When we got hurt.
Exactly. Or they could be very scared, right? You see people who get really like they haven't seen blood, they can't. That whole set of actions you take to like stabilize, help someone feel a little better. You may say to them, don't be scared. I have help on the way.
Yes.
Who can I call for you, right? Is there somebody I should call like from your family to let them know? So all of these steps actually helps them emotionally settle down too, right? But you're not going to ask somebody who's bleeding, who should I call before attending to their wound?
No. First we have to give treatment and then only we should talk to them.
Right. So when we talk about psychological first aid, you're not going to be providing this I'm just using that as an example to kind of show the immediate reason why you would have to respond. When you're in a hospital setting, you're not going to do any of the medical assistance at all, right? You may help the person sit up or, that may be, but you're not treating them. In that case, you're dealing only with the emotional experience of what it feels like to be there and to be scared and to be calmed down. So just think about it as a set of actions you do in an immediate way to respond to someone. And Amuda, you're completely correct. I think when you say psychological, we are talking about the emotional part of it. All right. So any other questions about this? Has anyone had the experience of having to do something like this?
Yes.
When I was 19, 20 years old, when I was about to cross the road, the person got hit with the motorbike. So, and he was bleeding. But he didn't come alone. Along with his family members, everyone was there. So I was running, help, get him some water, because nearby houses are there. Nearby my home, the main road is nearby my home. So and then they themselves called the ambulance, because I was too small, right? 18, 19 years old. First time seeing the accident in person. That is now he smiled at me and crossed the road and got hit. I was shocked. He saw me, he smiled at me and got hit, and he was bleeding on, he was crying. So I was also a bit scared and
right. But I would say, I mean, I think even in that example, right? If let's say you didn't do any, it's not like, the point I want to make is it's not about actually like medical crisis or medical emergency, but if you're standing on the side and this person is in the middle of the road, let's imagine that, you still have an opportunity to talk to this person to say, I saw what happened, somebody's come, like help is on the way, or keep talking to them to like calm them down. That is something you provide, that's psychological first aid. So that I just want to make a distinction. I'm not talking actually about the kind of medical things you might do, but what do you do to like help that person emotionally stabilize and calm down in the moment. I think I saw someone.
I was telling.
Did we?
Yeah, Helen.
Yeah.
Helen logged in,
Okay.
Mahima.
Okay, great. Okay. Aparna, you unmuted too. So do you want to share your point?
Medically, yeah, I've done, but the one thing that was new to me was I just came across a kid who showed signs of seizure at the age of 9. And she was not able to tell her parents. They were not ready to believe her because she was 9. Age of 9, schizophrenic is very, very hard.
Yeah, it's
very hard.
Strange.
That's very, very strange. So she had the cut in her tongue, and it was scarred. So when I asked her, she kept telling, someone asked me to bite my tongue. Someone asked me to, cut my hands. So that I was able to, first I had to see she was abused or not. First I had to, eradicate all those things, child abuse and all those things I had to eradicate. And that was I was proud of it. And that was my first time, I handled it. And that was an emergency condition for me because the age of 9 schizophrenic is very, very strange.
Yeah, right. Yeah. It's also an extreme example. It's not like something most of us would see in an everyday basis, right? Maria, are there any specific things that come to your mind just based on the work you've done so far?
Mahima, last week there was a function. You remember in Mylapur there is this Arvat Mover function will happen every year. So on the previous day to the Ther function, because the Swami will come out of the temple only by 10 p.m. So he goes back to the temple. So myself and Venkat, my husband, was little relaxed. So we just thought we can go to the temple. So the temple was jam-packed with people. Not jam-packed, but there was a lot of crowd standing. There was one guy, but he seems to be a little mentally challenged person. He looks like. So all of a sudden, there was some people, because when the Swami starts moving, people start coming back. So people started coming back, and this person couldn't handle himself because there was a lot of suffocation. So he got fits immediately. He was shouting. There was a huge sound next to me. I couldn't even understand what's happening next to me. And then he just landed, and he had the problem. And the worst thing is one person started taking video camera out of it. I felt very bad about it. I said, please, people move. Let Swami goes, that's different. But this person has to survive, which is far more important. So we called people first, all the people who used to carry the Swami on the shoulder. So we called them first to keep the people outside. And took this person out, and I just called the police to regulate the place because there is a lot of people. But I don't want something else to happen for this other person in the same place. And it took long time for me to get to the place because the sound was very hard when he landed on the back, and the fits was the first time I was witnessing that, and I didn't know how to react to that first one. So I just called some people to take help. I didn't know how to respond to that situation, but I thought I can take some help from the people to rescue him.
That's also a really, really good example. I think the one point I want to make over again is you're learning this because this is not intended for you to be doing this outside of the scope of your volunteering, right? So if you're volunteering and you think about like the kinds of situations that are going to come up for the women that you're working with, we're going to limit it to that scope. But psychological first aid itself is much, much broader than that, right? So in the example we just heard now, anything you do to like mobilize all the people around you to help this person, that also, because they're going to benefit from that. It's not just talking to them. In this case, if somebody's having a seizure, you can't be talking to them. That's not the goal. But you're actually helping by making sure that things don't get worse for this person, right? It could be frightening to have all these faces looking at you, or that's all emotional, right? When you feel like you're on display or you can't help yourself and you're breaking down in front of a lot of people have a lot of feelings about those things. And so how you manage that is part of how you help this person. Maria, anything else you want to add based on your experience at the hospital?
So far, I haven't had any experience at the hospital. So, I mean, if anything comes to my mind, I'll just let you know.
Okay, sounds good.
Mahima, I have a question. Maybe you're going to address this later. So all of the examples that you shared and we talked about was all the verbal way of ensuring. So probably what I understand is that once you are self-regulated, you'll be able to pass it on and all of that. But does psychological first aid always have to be verbal? That is my first question. Probably going to address this.
Yes. So I'll tell you, we are going to talk about it because I'm going to tell you exactly what the steps are, what you say, what you don't say, all of that.
Right.
But in general, you're providing psychological first aid, which is emotional first aid, right? Like let's call it that. It's even actually a little bit easier, to someone who's had something very traumatic happen or something very, very difficult happen to them. And you are the first person who's providing help to them, right? Emotionally. So it's mostly, it's actually majority verbal, but there are many non-verbal ways that this gets. So some examples of the non-verbal ways was crowd control. We just talked about, like, getting everybody else, because you have to do that in order for this person to feel safe. You're creating safety for them. That's not talking to the person who's hurt. That's actually managing the surrounding.
Right.
That also constitutes as psychological first aid.
Right. It actually brings me to my next question. As I'm listening, and by the way, I'm learning this for the first time. So treat me like a kid when I'm asking you questions. When we talk about this, I mean, what you're saying, it sounds to me, in my mind, it keeps coming to me that, do I become protective about the person around me, whoever it might be? I'm not talking about, like, even the example of Subhashri here.
Yes.
There has to be some sort of a emotion in her of being the forebearer there or the protector there to take honest and responsibility to do. Is that something that is important, to take action? To take the role of the person who wants to make a change? Is it important in a psychological first aid?
Very, very good question. And I'll tell you the answer depends on many things. It's the context, right? If the person you're trying to help cannot consent, for example, cannot tell you, yes, you be my spokesperson, I want you to help me in this way, then you have to do what it's going to take to, like, make sure that they're safe and alive, right? Sometimes it's actually like they could get really harmed in the process. If that is the case, you have to step up and do it on their behalf. And they're not in a position to tell you, Smita, I want you to help me in this way. When we talk about this in the hospital setting, that's not what you're going to be dealing with at all, right? Like you're not dealing with someone, you're not doing any life-threatening interventions. But what you are going to deal with is, you can explicitly talk to this person about, how would you like me to be advocating for you, right? Do you want me to do this? Never forget that they have choice and they have power, right? That's you're not a substitute for them if they don't want you to be a substitute for them. And that verbal agreement is super important, which is exactly what we're going to look at, right? Some of the core actions of psychological safety. Let's just think about it in this way. Your first job is to actually create a sense of safety, because that person may be feeling threatened by everybody else. They may be worried about what's going to happen. Your job is to actually create a sense of safety and make them feel immediately like they have somebody who they can trust, who's standing right next to them, right? You may have to say this explicitly. Second, attending to basic needs, right? Talking about emotions can only happen if their basic needs are met. So let me give you an example. Let's say you're meeting with a lady who's about to go into labor, okay? And she's having a crisis. She is worried. She may be worried about the gender of the baby, because that's going to give, there's a lot of complications in her mind. And you realize that she is refusing to find a place to settle down or sit, or is pacing, and you know that it's not good for her, right? Or she hasn't eaten anything at all and she's about to go into labor, and once you're in labor, you can't be eating then. So there's a period of time when you have to actually eat. Your job is to actually maybe remind that person about, can I get you something to eat right now? What is your most basic need that's going to comfort you before we can talk about safety or your emotions, right? It's an example of a basic need. This is the third one, which we've been talking about a lot. What can you say or do to actually increase her own capacity to maybe advocate for herself, if that's possible, or collective efficacy? So she may have her husband there, or she may have her family members there. Who can you bring into the mix to help her, right? Not all family members are helpful. But if she says, I want my sister here to help me, or I really need my mother here, right? You can enable that, because you have a little bit more power in the system than she does, maybe. And so how are you going to use that to help this person? Build a relationship with them. I mean, this is not going to happen at the moment, right? Which is why your presence over time, helping people, if they see you over and over again, they're going to connect with you. And so you show up consistently. If you say you're going to be there at a certain time, be there at a certain time, right? Don't let that person down. That fosters a connection. And then creating hope. A lot of times we don't know what the outcome is going to be exactly, right? You don't know 100% that this person is going to have a great delivery or they're not going to be in pain. So it's not about making false assurances, but actually giving the person some hope. Even if you said, I know you're going to be okay, right? That's helpful for someone to hear when they're feeling hopeless or in a really bad crisis. So these are some of the core actions. When you think about psychological first aid, these are the things you want to kind of get to at some point in time in that action phase that you're taking. So let's take a deeper look at this, right? So first one, contact and engagement, right? Which is, what is our goal? It's actually to respond to contact, any kind of contact that the survivor, this could be somebody who's traumatized, right? I use the delivery as an example, but there could be other things that are, that are traumatic to someone. Let's say, this is another example. Let's say you are meeting with someone who has domestic violence in their history, right? And this person is coming to the hospital for a checkup. You notice that they are bruised all over. So maybe they were beaten the night before. That is an example of someone who might need your help. They may not come to you and say, help me, or this happened to me, especially in domestic violence. There's so much shame, right? So the tendency is to hide it. But if you are the person who's there to help them and you're their trusted partner and they know you could actually initiate a conversation in a very non-intrusive way, right? Not going up to the person immediately saying what happened when they're not ready to tell you yet. but actually saying, there are things I can do to help you. I'm not going to ask you about what happened, but there are things that I can do to help you. How are you feeling right now? Are you in pain? You don't even have, this person knows that they're beaten up. So you don't have to have them repeat it. It's silly to make them repeat it, right? Like it's not even necessary. You both know it. So just start there in a non-intrusive way to say, what can I do to help you? Right? Is there anything I can do to keep you safe when you go home today? Maybe out of your control, but when you're here, I want you to know that you're really safe when you're with me right now. That's a huge faith building thing to say. And it's not just saying it, you have to also be there and actually do it, right? So the first is contact and engagement. The second one is safety and comfort, right? So you're telling this person, I am your person to provide some safety in the moment. I may not be living in your house, so I can't keep you safe there. But when you're with me, you can be sure that I'm going to keep you safe here. Same thing with physical and emotional comfort, right? It's to Smita's point, maybe it's not verbal at all. And if you know the person really well, even putting your arm around a person says a lot. And that's all you may have to do. Don't have to use any words, but you're communicating through your body language. Sometimes people feel like something's wrong with them, and that's why these things happen, right? If you go sit next to them, it's a huge step, right? Because they don't feel like you're rejecting them or there's something so wrong that you want to sit so far away from them. So think about very, very simple human things that we all do that is actually part of this. Someone came off mute.
That is correct. Yeah, that I have experienced. When my little one or even my first daughter is a bit stressed, when I go on, don't worry, when I hug them, then their mind has been changed. And
correct.
They came back to
physical touch. And that's tricky. That's very tricky because we're also talking about people who are, you may not know them very well, right? And when it's a trauma survivor, for a domestic violence victim, touch can be very activating, right? Like they're scared. They're not, this is the hypervigilance that we're talking about. You see people like jerk a lot when you touch them, like it reminds them of
moral support. It's
no, but touch is not always good either, right? So even if you said to the person, can I hold your hand? Can I ask permission and then do it, right? So you're explaining to them why you're doing it and not just assuming that they're going to be okay with it. So, but you don't have to use words is my point. There are other gestures you can show. Stabilization, which is to actually calm the person down. This, if you take the example of the person who's in crisis or is going into labor and feels like it's a crisis, actually one way to calm them down is to tell them exactly what's going to happen next. A lot of times doctors don't take the time to actually describe this, explain it, right? They just assume that you're going to know it. Even if this is their second, third, or fourth child and they've already gone through the process, it's very important to just let me tell you exactly what's happening so you can feel calm and you have some control. Yes, Smita, go ahead.
So it's great that you're bringing this up, Mahima, because recent conversation about postpartum depressions that we are having and what the hospital is looking at is, and I'm so glad that all of our facilitators have gone through it, is it possible to actually tell the mother what's going to happen right after she goes through contractions, pains, and she's going to be wheeled in, and then she's wheeled out? Can your facilitators talk? So good that you brought this up because this is something that our facilitators will definitely have to do in stage 2.
Yes. Yeah. And that means you have to get educated on that yourself, right? Like you can't just make up something that's not true. You actually should know what the protocol is. If you don't know, ask a nurse, right? If you ask them what's going to happen next for this person, they're going to explain it to you and then you can explain it to them because the nurse probably doesn't have the time to do it. offer practical assistance, right? This could mean maybe this is a mother who's worried about her child hasn't eaten breakfast in the morning, right? And their child is outside. That's a worry for the mother, right? Attend to that need. That will make this person feel much better. That's part of psychological first aid. Connection with social supports, right? Who do you want to be here helping you? How do you, and again, I'm assuming that there are people who are coming with the patient to like help. There are some people you might see who don't have any social support either, right? Then you're kind of taking on that function in the moment. Give them some information on coping. This may not be, this is not to say you should do this when they're in the middle of labor and in crisis, right? But you can, even if you said, when you are done giving birth, there are all these resources here to like help you. This is the postpartum program, right? That you might be launching at some point. You have a lot of resources. I'm going to help you figure out what you need. I will be here when that happens, right? Like reassuring them that you're not just temporarily there, you're going to follow through and actually help them when they get to the other side. And then actually link them with any resources, any services that you are actually able to provide. Smita, anything else you want to add to this?
No, I mean, I just wanted to bring the point because of the newness of the PPD scheme. That's why I want to bring it, make it relevant.
One thing we could also do is look at specific case vignettes and scenarios, and then think about this when you have when people have a little bit more experience.
Mahima, one thing is that at the onset of the session, people probably joined in late, so I just want to bring it up. You had mentioned this statement.
Yeah.
Where you said that the premise of psychological first aid is that you don't have to be a therapist to help someone. So all of the things that you are telling is with that idea that all of our facilitators can do all of these steps and the activities, right?
Exactly.
So since people joined late, I thought I'll just bring it.
No, very good point. Yes, that is absolutely right. None of these steps that I'm listing are something that only the therapist has to do. That's not the point of psychological first aid. It's actually really, I mean, people are training whole neighborhoods to have this, right? Like, for example, in San Francisco, we have a lot of people who are homeless and have a mental health crisis, right? So we see this on our street. Many citizens are getting trained in psychological first aid, no background in therapy or anything like that. It's just, how do you help the person immediately when they need help? If you don't know what you're doing, you can make it worse. So it's really open to anyone who wants to like think in this way. It's more a mindset, actually, right? And then using your power in the moment to take some actions to help. I think you might have seen this before. I'm not sure if I actually showed it in the training last time. Maybe not.
Yes, but we did. We went through stages of grief during the grief trauma training.
Right. So putting this back up here, because for psychological safety, psychological first aid, this is actually very, very important, right? So if you're trying to reach somebody who's in a state of shock, trying to get a lot of details from them and that's not going to help them. They can't respond to you, right? So then you become a person who's frustrating them instead of helping them. But if they're in the other stages, right? Like even if they're in denial or anger, or I didn't include this one thing here, like they're ready to like get help, then asking them a set of questions at that stage is really helpful. But when they're in shock, actually just stabilizing them and not making it worse is really our only goal, right? So most likely with psychological first aid, you're only going to be dealing with people who are in one of these first 3 stages. Shock, I can't believe this is happening to me, which is denial. And then some anger, I want control over this, I'm losing control, I need your help, right? So think about it in that way. So when you're offering support to someone, who is needing your immediate assistance, the first thing you have to do is set very clear boundaries, right? This I can do for you. This I cannot do for you, right? So be very clear about what your role is and only work within the scope of your role, right? You're not a doctor. You're not a medical provider. You're not a nurse. So I would not, because you want to help them, you should not be giving them medical advice. For example, you should not be telling them, oh, this happened to me and I took this medicine, it helped me, or I chose a C-section because it really is the better way to do it. Whatever it is, that's not in your scope of role, right? So be very clear about what your boundaries are. What are you there to do? Prioritize practical needs. I already talked about this. Maybe they didn't eat anything that morning. And so providing psychological first aid means actually helping them get a meal, right? Accept that coping styles are different. You may actually meet somebody who doesn't want your help or is not used to anybody like talking to them or helping them, and they may push you away. You can even say, I completely understand. I'm just going to go sit in this chair, but I'm right here. You can see me. Whenever you feel ready to talk, just raise your hand or make eye contact and I'll walk right back to you, right? You're not abandoning them. You're actually respecting that they have a different coping style. Can't stress this enough. Empower impacted people by actually giving them a choice. You're not making decisions for them. They're making decisions for themselves. You're only helping them do that. And then acknowledge anything positive that the survivor has already done to keep safe so far, right? It's great that you came here in time. Very simple things, but it really is important to have a strength-based model. So what are some things you should not be doing? Let's look at that list. Don't give false assurances. We do this a lot, right? Just to make somebody feel better in the moment, we might say, I'm pretty sure nothing is going to happen to you. We don't know that. We actually don't know that, right? So don't give false reassurances. Be reassuring, but not in a false way, and speaking to things that you don't really know anything about or you don't have expertise in. This is very, very important. Do not debrief by asking any of the details of what happened, because that re-triggers trauma. And so you could be dealing with someone who's in a crisis and who's also now has to get in touch with the trauma of what happened and having to tell you. And like I gave the example of the domestic violence, you don't need to know, you can tell by looking, right? The details don't actually matter. And if you ask for details, the person may say, oh, nothing happened, I just fell down. And so it's not going to help you that much. It's actually more helpful to say, what can I do for you? Because now we both know you're hurt, no matter how it happened, right? Lead with solutions before listening. Very important in psychological first aid. A lot of times in therapy, for example, right, we lead with listening. We don't really offer solutions. This is the opposite, because there's something immediate that needs to be taken care of. So you're leading with a solution before actually listening to all the details and the story and the why. I'm sorry. Actually, don't lead with. I was trying to think about what was not sounding right about that. Don't lead with a solution. So solving the problem before actually listening is not helpful, right? And then don't debrief. Don't ask for traumatic, like details about the traumatic event. Don't make assumptions about what the survivors are experiencing, right? You don't know, because your life is different, and fully acknowledge that maybe you don't understand what's happening to the survivor. Do not speculate or offer inaccurate information. If you know something for sure, that's the only thing I would tell them. If you don't know what's going to happen, don't make any false promises. Don't speculate. I think this may be what's going to happen. You don't need to do that. Just only share the things you feel really sure about. And if you can't answer somebody's question, right? People have a lot of questions in the moment. Do your best to actually learn the facts. Go find out from somebody who knows the answer. Tell them that I don't have the answer right now, but I'm going to find out for you. So some of the don'ts in this category. Smita, anything else you want to add to this particular context? Something stand out to you?
No, I think you covered most of. I was just thinking about, and it's right there. Not giving advice.
Yes.
At a time, and I think you covered it.
Correct.
And that's one of the things that we generally have a tendency to jump into, because it is like, Maria is not here, but for example, the first time, I really want all of us to hear this. The first experience when we went to the hospital.
Yeah.
I think I already spoke about this in one of the sessions. So there was this nurse, probably a senior nurse, right? So she was having this very heated argument with the father, and the argument was about the time of the birth was incorrectly put. So they have this system where the time of birth of every mother's name and the time of birth keeps scrolling there for the people outside, because due to COVID, they can't go in. But the father said that, it's impossible because she was wheeled in so much before, you give me the right. So there was a lot of heated conversation between both of them.
Uh-huh.
In the middle of all this, Maria and I was just, looking at both of them, having the conversation. There was so much of urge for me, even after being in the mental health capacity, to tell the lady, tell the father, just don't worry about it. They will come back to you. But it was really not my choice. What I could have done is probably the psychological first aid that I can do is to ensure that I speak to the nurse, because definitely the father is very traumatized.
That's right.
So probably I should have,
exactly
spoken to this part. She was so vocal. But all I'm trying to say is, there is always a chance for us to slip, and we need to have that presence of mind to not.
Very true. And most of the time we make that slip because we can't tolerate feeling the helplessness ourselves, right? Like it makes you feel very, very helpless and out of control. And then you want to take charge. Who are you doing that for? For yourself or for the person that you're trying to help? And that, I think that's a very, very critical question to answer.
Very good.
All right. Is any of this confusing for anybody? If you have a question, I'm happy to spend some time answering any questions you have. Okay. Seems clear. All right. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about vicarious trauma, which is, in the beginning, I told you it was really like the psychological effect that helping others, right? So professionals and caregivers who provide support to survivors of trauma, we experience vicarious trauma because it's not just that they are traumatized, we're actually taking in that trauma. So actually one example I'll give you of vicarious trauma right now is, I don't know if you're seeing in the news things about Ukraine, right? The bombings over and over again in the TV. This is what's getting the images, right, of people running, fleeing, bombings. If you watch that news cycle over and over again, you're going to end up with actually some vicarious trauma. You're not in Ukraine right now. Nobody's bombing where you live right now, right? You're not in that danger. But you're probably not going to sleep well for a while. You get restless, you're anxious, you're on edge, because this is what that kind of imagery does to us over and over again. It's the same concept with vicarious trauma. You're helping somebody who's had something very traumatic happen. And because you're going to do this over and over again with different people and different traumas, it starts affecting you also, right? Like you can't just tolerate and help someone's pain without feeling some of that yourself. And that process is what we call vicarious trauma. So what are some symptoms of vicarious trauma? Exactly like trauma, sleep disturbances, intrusive thoughts, right? Like it's always on your mind. Maybe you talk to a lady in the morning and you're worried about her. You haven't heard anything. You had to leave. Your work is over there. You come home and conversation is playing in your mind. You are just in very intrusive thoughts. Restlessness, like pacing, not able to sit still, not able to settle. Avoidance and withdrawal. This happens a lot. You may wake up some mornings and feel like, I don't want to go to the hospital today because I just can't. I mean, I don't want to talk to anyone. I don't think I can go in today. You get a lot of people doing this kind of work, call in sick, right? As a way to like avoid feeling the trauma. I'm seeing some people smiling and nodding. Is this because it resonates with you or? Yes.
So I just want to tell everybody, and this is completely, for the record. So when you call in and say that you don't feel like coming in, even though it's your session time, it's perfectly all right, because Mahima has been endorsing this even before we started the project, is that if the facilitators don't feel ready, you need a backup. So it's the first person to flag it. So I'm actually smiling because this is something which she flagged it to us much earlier. So Adnala, this is a nice time for me to tell and bring this in. Tapping in is very important. How are you placed today is important because Mahima is going to address it. What are the symptoms, how to tap in, everything she's going to talk. But it's okay. It's okay for Aparna to call in and say, Smita, Iniki, I cannot come to the hospital, because we always will have a plan B, because Mahima was the first one to voice it. So we always will have a plan B, and the schedules that you will receive will also see a plan B. That is only to put you at ease. That you're not, holding the fort and, it's not going to be like that. And I'm hoping that will reduce your secondary stress trauma a lot. It's a very conscious effort from our side.
Yeah. Very important, right? Usually our systems are not actually set up to.
I didn't know you had a term for that. Called us, vicarious. What's that? Vicarious trauma. I didn't know you had a
meaning. Vicarious means like, right, but vicarious actually means living through the other person, right? That's what it means.
Yeah, I had terrible incidents for that. There was sorry, I didn't want to share it right now. I'll share it later.
Okay.
Can we carry on? Yeah.
All right. Hypervigilance. So same as people who have trauma, you also become hypersensitive to anything around you, right? Like, let's say Smita calls you from a number that's familiar to, like, like a Tunai phone number or something. Now that is associated with trauma and the work that you do there. And so maybe you feel like, oh, what is this going to be? Is it something bad? Is it something, right? Like, so it kind of brings up all of that anxiety. A lot of body symptoms. I remember when I was doing trauma work here in a school, out of nowhere, I would get these crippling headaches. I don't have headaches. I don't have my history of, like recently after giving birth to my child, I've had some migraines come, but this was not like in my history. And the headaches actually were because of how much stress I was dealing with, story after story of abuse, or, and not feeling like I was actually making an impact or changing anything, right? That's how my body was expressing it. Pay attention to that. If you notice something in your body that feels different, like back pain is the number one thing I see with people with secondary trauma. So if you start feeling things in your body, it could be that. It could be, I mean, it's probably a good idea to always get it checked out, right? Like, I'm not saying it's always secondary trauma, but usually the body is a good indicator of what you're feeling. A lot of guilt and self-blame, right? So you may be playing back conversations and thinking, oh, I should have told that person this, or I could have done this, and I didn't even think of it in the moment, or beating yourself up. And then lastly, dissociation, just disconnecting. So you show up, people tell you like their horrible story of what happened to them. You don't feel anything. It's because you've been so sensitized, right? Like you're listening to story after story. At one point, I used to feel like the most horrific stories of abuse just stopped making me feel. Like I would just note down all the details. I'd be nodding and not feeling. That's a sign that something's wrong. We're not meant to process information that's so difficult in that way. Smita, did you put something in chat or was it somebody else?
Yeah, I just said numbness.
Numbness
to another person's.
Yeah. Okay, so let's take a look at this. So there's another term which we call compassion fatigue, right? So when you show up with compassion and trying to help people all the time, you get fatigued by having to show that much compassion all the time. You have to be understanding. You have to be really kind. You can't show your irritation. Maybe you had an awful day before you left the house. Your child was giving you trouble in the morning, right? Throwing a tantrum, whatever it is. And now you have to show up there and actually put all of that on hold and be there for that person. You're going to feel some fatigue doing this over and over again. So let's look at how these things interact, right? What we call burnout is a combination of this kind of exhaustion where you feel really, really tired, fatigued, depleted. Then you start feeling like, why am I even doing this? There's no impact. I'm not seeing anything change. People are still coming in and behaving, acting in the same way. And then you start feeling like you don't connect at all with like people or the values. You think about, when I asked you, why did you come to Tunai to do this? You all had a very motivating, inspiring reason why, right? You lose that. You lose sight of that, or you feel like that's not what's driving you anymore, right? That's a change in your value. So when we talk about burnout, if you're feeling any of these things, it's very, very important to like take a step back and say, what's going on here? Is this too much for me? Right? Because if it is too much for you, remember always wearing your oxygen mask first. You're not going to be able to help somebody else if you're feeling all of these things and sitting in the middle of burnout. And it's almost better that you only do 1% and take care of yourself rather than be trying to do 100% and not taking care of yourself in the process. Because you can't do it for a long time, right? So this is a very important slide in my opinion. I think it's really helpful to think about how do you actually want to spend your time reflecting on some of these things that you are listening to and taking in other people's traumatic stories, other people's difficult experiences, right? So the big difference is when we're ruminating, this is when we are going in a circle in our head, right? I think about some story and I just repeat. It's like a broken record. When I'm doing this movement, I think you can imagine how this just plays in your mind over and over again. That's rumination. So when we look at past events that have happened and we actually regret it, we lead with regret. Oh, I wish I had done that. I don't know why this happened. That's regret. When you look to the future, it makes you feel really anxious. So that when we're talking about that, we're talking about rumination versus reflection, right? When you're actually reflecting on something, it's not stuck in a loop. You're looking at the past of what something you said maybe, and you're actually learning from that experience and planning something better in the future. So you could say, oh, I wish I had said that, but I didn't. What can I do the next time I see this person differently? That's reflection. Versus rumination is just trying to live in the past and your regret of the wrong thing you said or the wrong thing you did. why this is so important is if you're stuck in rumination, your burnout and secondary trauma rate is going to be very high. So the way you take care of yourself is try to really move more and more into reflection, right? Like it's a learning opportunity. If you made a mistake, it's okay, you made a mistake, but you learned from it. That's a very different mindset than just sitting in what you couldn't do right, or maybe you let that person down, or maybe the outcome that you were hoping for this mother you were helping was not good, right? None of these things are under your control, but once you start ruminating, it's a very, very difficult thing to shift out of that. Any questions on that? It's not always straightforward, this slide, but it's important. So I'm going to stop and ask if you have any questions.
When we were speaking something about compassion fatigue, and when we are in burnout, any adds on how to come out of it, or
we're going to get there in one couple of slides. So let's think a little bit about this concept of resilience, right? This is what psychologists define as our capacity to bounce back from something really, really difficult. We all have some example of this, right? You think back on your life, there's always something you've done that you cannot believe you've bounced back from that. As much as resilience is about bouncing back, it's actually also about personal growth, right? So you bounce back, but you also grow from that experience because you've learned something. So resilience, a lot of people think resilience is like, oh, some people are very strong, or some people have a personality that's very resilient. But actually, research shows that it's not just some people, it's very ordinary. It's not something extraordinary. Everybody is actually resilient. How we understand our resilience, how we build our resilience, how we own our resilience, those things look a little different. But by and large, it's not the ability. It's not like some people have an ability to learn resilience and other people don't. It's mostly because resilience actually involves behaviors, thoughts, and actions that anyone can actually learn and cultivate, right? It requires you to pay attention to yourself, take care of yourself, understand when you can't make time for yourself, why, right? Those behaviors and the things that you do to really take care of yourself can build your resilience. And this is not like for some special people in the world who are able to do it. It's actually under control for any one of us. And then emotion regulation, another key concept in taking care of yourself, which is actually the ability for us to understand how we are feeling and how we are getting through the day before we actually try to help someone else. So let's imagine this. If you're really angry, right, and you show up at the hospital to help somebody else, they haven't made you angry. Something happened, maybe in your house, with your husband, with somebody like a neighbor, and it's put you in a really angry mood. But you're not aware of it. You're just showing up there. You may be feeling a mild irritation or whatever. You don't really realize how angry you are. You show up there and you're trying to help somebody else in that angry state, not even knowing that you're angry. If you can imagine that, what do you think might happen? Just knowing yourself, tell me what you might say or do if somebody, like this mother who's about to have a baby is asking you for something. Can anyone say how you might act?
As if I don't care.
And that person has not done anything to you, right? But you did not recognize that you went in angry. So if you recognize that, okay, I am feeling this feeling right now, what do I need to do to regulate myself before I enter the hospital? Very, very important, right? Because it's not your intention to hurt anyone. But you might, like Smita and I were sharing in our example, when I get stressed, I snap at people, right? I can be like mean or lash out, or if I'm the person who's going to help you and I'm lashing out at you, it defeats the purpose of what this program is trying to do, right? Like, that's not why you're there. Your job is to actually manage all the feelings you have and show up for that person and treat them with respect, with kindness, with any love you can find to really like help them get through their situation. So this piece is very important to like really understand. Take a minute. One thing that I always find helpful is, before I enter into any space to help somebody else, I actually take a minute to slow down, calm my thoughts down, and I write down what is my feeling word that's coming to my mind right now, right? If I write stressed or flustered or irritated, it tells me that I have to take 5 more minutes maybe before I can go in. But if I'm feeling really calm, if I'm feeling good about myself, if I'm feeling like, oh, I'm ready to go in and help, eager, then I can walk in right away. So taking that extra time to really understand, how are you feeling? What do you have to leave behind before you enter that space to help someone else? It's really, really important. So what are some of these skills that we're talking about in terms of your own emotions and taking care of yourself? First one, self-awareness. We have a tendency to like push difficult feelings away, right? Your job is the opposite in this, like through this training and as you're doing the work, you actually have to become more self-aware and not really push feelings away, right? Like your job is to be in touch with your own feelings, because if you can't do that, you can't actually help someone else. Be mindful. So when you're going into that setting, you have a specific job. Really be clear about what that job is. How are you going to approach it today? Have an intention for yourself. Very important. Reframe things, right? Maybe the last patient you tried to help, it didn't go so well, but that doesn't mean you failed at it, right? You're dealing with people who have trauma and really hard things happening to them. You can't change their world, right? So they may have yelled at you or they didn't take the help that you offered. That does not make you a useless person. So that's cognitive reappraisal, like really thinking about yourself in a different way, understanding that even though they may not be responding to you in the moment, you still have something to offer, and holding on to that. Be adaptable. Maybe you went with a plan and the entire plan had to be thrown out and you have to do something different. That's what you're going to have to do, right? That's what resilient people do. When things change, they can still bounce back. And lastly, but not least, self-compassion. The kindness you show towards others, show towards yourself too. Because without this piece, it's very difficult to actually help someone else. So I think, Aparna, you were asking about coping strategies, right? Or how do we do this? What research shows over and over again is having coping strategies in these 3 areas is very, very helpful. So usually we're all good at having something that works for us, which is in one of these categories. So for example, maybe you do yoga. I'm just making that up. Let's say you do yoga, right? That's in the body category. But what we also need is something you do in the cognitive category and the relational category. So the cognitive is all thinking, for example, you may decide you want to read more about vicarious trauma, Aparna, right? Now that you know what that term is, you want to read more about it. That's a cognitive strategy. And we don't think about that as a coping strategy, right? Because we always think about it as like a relaxation thing we do, or go get a massage or go for a hike, but sometimes those things are not possible, right? Like it's like Amuda was saying, you can't just leave your daughter and go get a massage. That's not going to like be a thing that you do. But you can do things that are very easy to do. And actually reading about vicarious trauma for some of us cognitively, that's actually maybe helpful because you understand more about how you're going to respond. That's a coping strategy, right? Relationally, connecting with people, very, very important because our life is busy and you're taking in all this trauma. And the thing we forget to do is actually reach out to friends and family and the people we like to spend time with, and making sure that you have the time to like connect with them is going to go a much longer way than if you didn't do that. Resilience is very, very closely connected to relationships and connections. This is why other people are so important in our life. So the key point I want to make here is think about, in the cognitive strategy, what is one thing that you would like to do, right? It's your go-to. For some people, it might be journaling, right? Like some people write a journal that really helps them. Reading about things could help you. Think about it. For yourself, what is that cognitive thing that you'd like to do more and more of? The second is body-based, right? Which is, how do you take care of your body? Maybe it's going for a very brisk walk. Maybe for you, Aparna, waking up at 5 a.m., like 7 a.m. and going to the beach. Make that a routine, right? Like this is the thing I do every Saturday with my kids. And if you can't keep up with it, it's not a failure. It's really just more the commitment to keep trying, right? So think about that. Like those two things will hit both relational and body, right? Because you like spending time with your kids. It's lovely to see them play in the sand and be carefree and not wear a mask and be in the outside. And that gives you a lot of enjoyment. And you're probably getting some exercise in, right? Like you can walk along the beach, or you can, you're getting out, getting fresh air. So it hits the body and the relational. So think about, very simple things that give us pleasure, but make them more of a habit. That's really what these coping strategies are. I'm not a big fan of, like the kind of strategies that require you buying a whole gym in your house, or I don't know, putting a face mask and sitting down. Great. But that's at the end of the day, it's not going to like be the thing that sometimes helps. We think of like this is what we see in media and it's fed to us as self-care. But self-care is actually, for me, self-care is cooking. I love to cook. It calms me down. It's very therapeutic. If I can get an hour to cook every day, I would be super happy. For some people, it's a stress to cook, right? So then that's the opposite. It's not going to help you. So think about very simple things that actually have, what can I say, like easy to do and things you can do all the time and make into a habit. I think those things are really important, self-care. Reading a book, example of a cognitive, like takes your mind off, but you're reading and kind of feeding your mind at the same time.
Mahima, can I just say something here?
Yes.
So it's just that it's so beautiful that we are doing this at the end of the whole training process, because many things are coming together. So in Dr. Govind's session, and I really want all of you to back me up here, he was stressing on the importance of why it's important to develop habits, because habits are ways of forming new neural connections and patterns in your brain. Mm-hmm. And that is very helpful in what he also taught us about neuroplasticity. Yeah. And the importance of why a mom or a dad, a parent should do it, because it in a very subtle way encourages the child to start making newer neuron connections. Yeah. So I'm just thinking it's all falling in place.
Yeah, right? Exactly the same principle here, right? If you cannot form a habit around taking care of yourself, it's going to be very hard to actually take care of yourself. So I would say, I think that's the neuroplasticity concept is super cool, right? Like it actually means we're regenerating neurons in our brain. And the more you create habits, that's the pathway to actually do that. So think about that. Think about, one cognitive strategy, one body-based strategy, and one relational strategy that you'd like to do more of. Okay, so the last question before we end that I have for the group, what are your hopes and what are your fears of going into the hospital and actually starting the work? You can put it in chat if you don't want to unmute, but if you want to speak, just unmute and tell me, what are you looking forward to and what are you afraid of?
I encourage all of us to do this, because this is going to be a complete understanding of what we have taken from all of our training sessions, and what is I will also be able to understand, Mahima will be able to understand about our level of readiness and expectancy. This is a good time for me to bring up that Mahima has very kindly volunteered to meet with the facilitators, all of us, once every month or every 2 months as sort of a debrief. So she's going to be taking up all our cases individually, in the sense she's going to be backing us up and trying to understand we are doing what we set out to do here in the hospital setting. So it will be a very important point to please share your reflections right now with Mahima. Please be vulnerable and open. This is a learning space. Nobody is going to judge anybody.
Exactly. I mean, if you're afraid, I want to hear that, right? We want to help you figure out what more can we do to help you. So
okay, my hope is I just want to make a small change and first we are going to deal with the nurses, right? So simple how to relax themselves. At least whatever.
Sorry.
First we are going to deal with the nurses, right?
Yeah.
That's fine. So at least I want some impact. At least one session, if I go, I want to, whether they have changed or not, the impact should be there. Whatever I have told, she told me like this, we can do this. At least we have to practice like that. I want initially, because my fear is how I am going to convey. So far we haven't done
them.
Convince them. Yes.
So I'll tell you. Yeah, great. One thing I'll tell you, it's going to take maybe 10 times of you saying the same thing before you're going to see any change. Maybe, right? You don't know. I hope not. But very likely that they're also not used to other people coming into their settings and telling them anything different, right? Change is hard for everyone. We all know that. But if you empathize with them, right? You know how hard change is, and you kind of stay strong. It's not, if you're not seeing any change, it's not because you're doing it wrong or you're not the right person for it, or you're trying to make change in a system that's very difficult to make change in, right? But that doesn't mean we don't try. When you have to break a wall down, you can't do it in one strike, right? It's impossible to do it in one strike. You have to keep
so many strikes.
Chipping, exactly, right? But do you have the willpower to keep chipping? Because if you give up on that, then you're not going to bring the wall down. And that's still impact, right? Every chip is an impact.
Impact, that's
right.
My first, initially, I want the hope. I want to give the impact to everyone.
Yeah.
At least the impact will give a change, right? One day,
exactly.
At least.
Yes.
As you told, 10 times, sometimes five times, sometimes 15 times.
That's right.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Amada, what are your fears about this project? What is your fear? Could be anything, but it's a good time for you to reflect and actually talk about it.
Yes, my fear is how so far we haven't trained any practical sessions, right? We are just ஒரு என்ன சொல்றது, நம்ம தான் ஒரு ரிஹர்சல் மாதிரி பண்ணியிருக்கோம். We haven't met anyone, right? அது கொஞ்சம் இனிஷியலா first 2 times it will be careful, right? How I am going to do this?
Right.
Entirely new area to me. Completely new area because I am an MCA graduate. It is so far practical experiences and my willingness. So and the fear koncha irukku. That fear is little in me, but still I have confidence I can do it. At least on seeing someone else how they are doing it, I can do it.
Right. That's great. I don't think anyone is not going to be anxious, right? Like you will be anxious, you will be afraid a little bit. So owning that and speaking to that's very, very important. Not denying that. If somebody told me they're not afraid at all, I'd be worried.
This is a good stress. Fear, having stress is a positive stress. And that's something which we can work on to grow. We also did a session about good stress, bad stress, overwhelming, and I think Mahima, even you addressed this in the last session. So so it's a good stress. Fear is good as long as you're able to control it by being aware.
Aparna, as long as it doesn't stop you.
Aparna, would you like to go next?
I would like to share one more thing. Shall I?
Sure. Yes, of course.
Yeah, even actually, my family, I was broken into pieces. How I can handle my daughter, because she was also under very stress, and the impacts I'm attending this TNPN program for 1.5 months, right? This gave me an impact. That impact make me I build myself again. No, can bring it up. I will get stressed also. At the same time, no, we should do that. I want to do yoga with my daughter, and I how I can bring her up. That also it helps me. That's what I would like to share. No,
it's
really,
a really good point.
I was broken into pieces, and I rebuild myself. And so a few points I have taken away from. At least one point I will take away from every session. That helps me to bring her, to build myself and motivate my daughter.
Yeah, that's great.
Thank
I think you're talking about like personal learnings too, right? It's not just
personal
what we're with others.
Also there. Correct. So since I have changed myself, I can make change in others also. So this is not easy. But the impact is there. Correct. I didn't change immediately, but the impact is no. I should do that. In 1 day or 2 days, I will start practicing the yoga. That and all help me.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, Aparna, do you want to go now?
Yeah, sure. I really hope to be helpful, be of service, and show my potential. And what I'm scared of is being a medical practitioner. I was in a dominating part,
right.
And this is something new. I will not know when to step back, and that is what I might, like this, compassion fatigue. I might easily go in for that. Because I have an option.
Correct.
If not this, I always have my profession. Right. I'm not changing the profession though. I'm trying to be of service.
But it's a different role.
Yeah, different role. So this I'm scared of. What if some people scolds me? Okay. So I don't have to take it, right? So that I'll have to step back and I'll have to start taking it. So this is where it becomes a question: will I be able to do it? I'm scared of that. Scared of, will I be? And I have a question: will I be useful? These two is my seriously I'm scared of this.
The yelling at you or the scolding is how you said it.
No, exactly. They're not recognizing me or just they're taking me for granted. Yes. I've never been in that position.
Yeah. I mean, for you, it sounds like you actually have to come to terms with giving up a little bit of the power you're used to having. Right?
Yeah.
Right. But you're not losing that forever. In this role, it's a different task. But that's, the slide that I had up around what is in the scope of your role, because you may feel pulled to give more advice based on your expertise, right? It's hard for us not to do that, but you have to consciously tell yourself that is not your role. You're there for a very different reason. You're not treating them. You're not, right? So I'm so glad you're actually noticing that now. Because you're going into it with self-awareness. This is self-awareness.
Yeah, but bringing it into practice is actually difficult, I think.
Yes, and I just think you have to be in the situation and not just be imagining it. And I feel hopeful because you have this self-awareness that you can make it work. If you didn't have this at all, that would, like I said, that worries me, when people are not tuned into what they need. You're less likely to act on it.
That's my hope. Let's see.
Oh my God, that's a great one. Thanks for sharing. And I'm actually thinking about it. Yeah. That's
we'll have to go. Let me see how I react, and then we'll have to come up with it.
Also how Amuta goes into that same work is going to look different from how you do it, how Steffi is going to do it, how Jana's going to do it, right? We're not all the same. And this training is not to imply we all have to do it in the same way. You each have something that you're really good at, something you're very strong at. So lead with that. And it can look different. It doesn't have to look the same. That's not the point of this.
So I think what's one of the most important things that comes to my mind is that probably our end objective is the same, but I think the whole initiative has to be very, very porous, very acceptable for each other's potential. Because Aparna, I can say this when I see, as people being with you all, literally we have done this together. This is the last session. Been interacting with all of you. I can see there's so much of strength each one of us have that we're taking to the setting, and it was very important for me to also understand what your fears are, and I kind of now see it from your lens. Now it's making me think, how can we be more accommodative? And probably pull you in times when you really need to step up and be a leader and speak, probably with the nurses, and tell them information. There are some sessions which are informative. Not all sessions are facilitative. There are some informative sessions. Probably we can choose you to start with that in order to make you feel more at ease. Talk to us about it. That's exactly what I think Mahima is also trying to tell us is we have to be our own support.
Correct.
we have to know what each of us are thinking. And I mean, I can't say enough thanks to Mahima for actually bringing this slide up. She started putting so many things in perspective for me as well. So, so we will talk about it. I'm so glad that you brought it up. This is an important point because we don't want to go there feeling undermined by anyone. That's not the case. So we will see how we can work that out.
Right. And also in Aparna's case, actually the nurses may respond to that also, right? Okay. Like knowing your background, because a lot of times, for example, right, if another psychologist told me something, I'm likely to listen in a very different way than if it's not, and it's not like if you don't have subject matter expertise or something, I might feel like, okay, but do you know exactly what? So you have that credibility already. And so maybe you can, that can build connections for you with them. So it's not to say you have to like.
About it too.
Right.
I've thought about it too. I feel bad for the nurses in that case. They might have a lot of experience, but if you're a medical practitioner, the government nurses, the private nurses, any nurses, they do give respect for that medical practitioner, being a dentist, trauma care person, physician. The nurses, they have that thing. I don't know how. The ICU nurses are more knowledgeable than many of
they are doing they are really doing the work.
Exactly. And they do give respect to the doctors, even the newly doctors who have entered in. The young doctors, that, like you told me, I have that credibility. Yeah,
exactly.
And also, just so that all of you know that we're going to be walking into the setting probably from the next week or the week after. And we will be working, like what Amuda was saying, we'll be working initially with the nurses, talking a lot to them. But you will be interacting with the mothers because you will have to go and do the sessions with them, with the columns and all of that. So all of this is going to be put to practice. So what I'm trying to say is that probably after 2 months, we'll each write out the answer to this question. We'll send it to Mahima. We'll ask her.
Great idea.
Yeah. Let's answer this question after 2 months. Yeah. And let's make a commitment that we will do it. Answer this question in 2 months and see how much we're able to add or minus from our fears and strengths. And we need to be having it. I think, Mahima, this is bringing up an important point, how important debriefing sessions are going to be. Exactly. Because the more and more we're going to be working with the government involving itself, I think probably they might feel a bit burnt out, but we will need debriefing sessions.
Yeah,
we'll talk probably about that.
Yeah,
I'll write to you and you can let me know your reflections.
Okay, sounds good.
Steffi and Janet, would you like to go? Would you like to answer this question? I think it's really important. But if you cannot do it right now, can you at least send an email to the group or send it on WhatsApp? Okay. All right. I think that's about it. Right?
All right.
Mahima, do we have more slides?
No, that was the end of the training.
All right. Okay. So which is great. So I think we ended on a very high note with something that I think I'm starting to think about, and all of us have to. I don't want to say have to, but all of us can probably start thinking on those lines, on what your strengths are. Because Mahima, that's what she's saying is each of us are going to be doing every implementation differently. So எப்படி ஒருத்தருக்கு நம்மளுக்கு ஸ்ட்ரெங்த் என்னெல்லாம் டிஃப்ரெண்டா இருக்கு. இப்போ அமுதாவோட ஸ்ட்ரெங்த் there's a lot of empathy அவங்க பேசும்போது, probably that's your strength. Think about it. அது அந்த செட்டிங்ல போய் தான் நம்மளுக்கு தெரியும். Give yourself a chance. It's okay if you make mistakes. I made a lot of mistakes. So that's how I also learned to be there. And I'm sure Mahima has her own stories. Adnala we each share and be vulnerable. Say that this is a mistake I made. I learned from it, so that we don't make each other's mistakes. Let's make new ones and keep learning new things. Having said that, of course, this is not goodbye, because we'll be talking to Mahima very regularly on aspects of debriefing and all of that. So I'm wishing all of you best of luck for the upcoming implementation parts. You will probably hear a lot from me towards from early next week with a schedule, plan A, plan B, everything will come to you. We will have a separate session on that. Mahima, thank you so much.
Sure. Good to see you all.
We need to reinvent words to thank you because I've lost words.
Oh, come
thanking you. You've always had our backs, and I'm sure we're going to be doing more stuff in future. So we are going to be talking to you on the Trauma Informed Schools project as well.
Okay, yeah.
We'll get back to you on that. So that's going to be the next pet project that we're taking up once this takes off. So more on that later. Thank you everybody for logging in on a Tuesday morning. Mahima, have a very good night.
Thank you. Have a good day. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye everybody. Bye.